"You don't belong here, black trash," Victoria Carver snarled, her voice dripping disdain as she glared at Latrice Monroe, her black daughter-in-law, in the lavish Chicago villa kitchen. Alexander, the husband of Latrice, stood silent in agreement, while Sophia, his pregnant mistress, smirked triumphantly. Latrice froze, hands trembling over the dinner she'd lovingly prepared, her caramel skin flushed with humiliation. This raw betrayal ignites a firestorm of racism and deceit, exposing a family's dark empire built on prejudice. What hidden fraud will Latrice, the black wife, uncover? How will she turn their mockery into their downfall? And what shocking truth about Sophia's baby will shatter everything? Dive into this gripping tale of revenge and empowerment. Hit subscribe for more riveting stories of justice and share in the comments where you're watching from. Your support fuels these tales. Stay tuned. The twists will leave you breathless and inspired. The aroma of garlic and thyme wafted through the spacious kitchen of the Carver Villa, a sprawling estate perched on the edge of Chicago's affluent Gold Coast neighborhood, where Latrice Monroe moved with quiet grace, her hands deftly chopping fresh herbs on the marble countertop. At 28, she was a vision of understated elegance, her caramel-toned skin glowing softly under the warm pendant lights, her straight black hair neatly bunched low at the nape of her neck. And though she had once dreamed of teaching children in her Southside community, she had set that aside to support her husband's rising career in finance, weaving love into every meal she prepared. She wore a simple cotton blouse and jeans, practical for an evening at home, though she'd slipped on a light apron to protect against splatters from the simmering sauce. And this ritual grounded her amid the chaos of high society events that defined their life. Alexander had always praised her cooking, calling it the one thing that kept him steady, and as she hummed a soft melody, an old soul tune her mother used to sing back in the modest apartments of Southside Chicago, she planned a quiet dinner for just the two of them, away from the endless galas and networking that pulled him away. Their marriage, now 3 years strong, had been her anchor, lifting her from a life of scraping by to one of unimaginable luxury. But lately cracks had appeared. Late nights at the office, curt texts, and Victoria's ever-present shadow, whispering judgments laced with racial undertones that made her blood boil in silence, though she pushed them down to maintain peace. The front door clicked open, and Latrice's heart lifted with anticipation, for she called out that Alexander was early and dinner was almost ready, complete with his favorite braised short ribs. But her smile faltered the moment she turned and saw him standing in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space like a storm cloud. His dark hair slicked back and his blue eyes, usually sparkling with charm, now flat and distant. He wore his tailored suit like armor, the tie slightly loosened as if he'd been rehearsing this moment, and behind him loomed Victoria Carver, his mother, a woman whose presence commanded rooms like a queen surveying her court. Her silver-waved hair pinned in an elegant updo, her pale skin etched with fine lines that spoke of a life of privilege and quiet manipulations. Clutching a designer handbag with gray eyes sharp as daggers and lips painted a severe red. Beside her, arm linked with Victoria's in a show of solidarity, was Sophia, Alexander's mistress from college. The ghost Latrice had always sensed but never confronted, radiant at 30 with golden blonde waves cascading over one shoulder, flashing a smile that didn't reach her bright blue eyes, tall and lithe in a sleek cocktail dress that screamed old money, her posture exuding the confidence of someone who belonged in this world. Latrice's stomach twisted as she asked what was going on and why they had company, her voice coming out softer than intended, a habit born from years of dimming her light to fit into their privileged circle, where she had endured subtle exclusions and overt slights that chipped away at her spirit. Victoria pushed past Alexander into the kitchen, her heels clicking like judgments on the tiled floor, while Sophia followed, her eyes scanning the room as if appraising what would soon be hers. And Victoria began with a saccharine yet slicing tone, declaring that Latrice had never been the daughter-in-law they envisioned, acknowledging her efforts with little meals and quiet ways, but insisting that Alexander needed someone who understood their world and elevated him, someone not from her background, for a black woman like her simply didn't belong in their circles. She gestured to Sophia, who nodded with a smug curl of her lips, her hand resting possessively on Alexander's arm as she added that it wasn't personal, but they couldn't have the family name tainted, and Sophia was carrying Alexander's child, a future heir that would secure their lineage without the complications of Latrice's heritage. Latrice's world tilted as the knife slipped from her fingers, clattering to the counter, and she pleaded for Alexander to deny it. But he only shifted uncomfortably, his silence a betrayal sharper than any words, muttering that it was best if she stayed with her mother for a while and packed her things. For this wasn't working anymore. The air thickened with betrayal coiling around her like smoke. For they had planned this. Whispers behind her back, secret meetings, all while she slaved over dinners and smiled through insults, including blatant racial digs at family gatherings where Victoria had sneered that they didn't need more diversity hires in the family, and Latrice, the woman from the South Side who had given up her dreams to support his ambitions, felt discarded like an outdated accessory because of her race. Her chest tightened with a storm of emotions raging inside. Shock and humiliation mingling with a flicker of rage she hadn't known she possessed. But she didn't scream or beg, instead straightening her back as her brown eyes met Victoria's with a quiet defiance that surprised even her, whispering that it was fine and she would go, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She turned away, moving mechanically to the bedroom upstairs, where the villa's opulent halls with crystal chandeliers and polished hardwood floors mocked her now, reminders of a life she'd never truly owned. For despite her loyalty and sacrifices, she had always been an outsider in their eyes, treated as unseen and unworthy due to her skin. Packing was swift, a suitcase of clothes, her mother's old necklace, a few books, but no photos of their wedding or mementos of the love she'd believed in. For those illusions had shattered in the kitchen below, where the united front of Victoria, with her arms crossed, exuding triumphant disdain, Alexander the coward staring at the floor, and Sophia the usurper already eyeing the space as her domain lingered in her mind. As she descended the stairs, they watched in silence, Victoria with a satisfied smirk, Sophia whispering something that made Alexander nod weakly, and Latrice paused at the door, the cool evening breeze slipping in like a promise of escape, saying softly more to herself than to them that they thought they'd won but had just awakened something they couldn't control, before stepping out into the twilight, the door closing behind her with a finality that echoed in her soul. The drive blurred in tears she finally allowed to fall, but beneath the pain a quiet fire simmered, a resolve born from years of being overlooked, diminished, and racially targeted. For Latrice Monroe wasn't broken but awakening, vowing silently as the city lights faded behind her that this betrayal would not define her but forge her into something stronger. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and shadow as Latrice gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles pale against the dark leather, for the villa receded in the rearview mirror like a monument to the fragile life she'd built on sand. And tears stung her eyes though she blinked them away, focusing on the road ahead that led south toward the familiar grit of Chicago's South Side, the neighborhood that had shaped her with its authenticity trumping pretense. Her mother's house was too far and fraught with questions she wasn't ready to answer, so she veered toward Aisha's place instead, a modest brick row house on a street lined with chain-link fences and blooming community gardens, where her childhood friend remained the one constant in a world spun out of control. And as the engine ticked down like a weary heartbeat past 9 o'clock, Latrice sat for a moment with her suitcase in the back seat, staring at the warm glow spilling from Aisha's window. How had it come to this, she wondered, for just hours ago she'd been chopping herbs and dreaming of a quiet evening. But now she was adrift and evicted from her own marriage, the betrayal coiling tighter with every breath. Yet beneath the pain, a quiet fire simmered, a resolve born from years of being overlooked and diminished. And with a deep breath, she grabbed her bag and knocked softly on the door, hoping for solace in the familiar embrace of her roots. Aisha opened the door almost immediately, her dreadlocks tied back in a colorful scarf and her full figure wrapped in a cozy hoodie and joggers, exuding at 28 the unapologetic strength of someone who'd fought through life's undercurrents just like Latrice, and her brown eyes widened in surprise before softening with concern as she pulled Latrice inside, the door clicking shut behind them while the scent of lavender incense and fresh coffee enveloped her in a stark contrast to the sterile luxury of the villa. Latrice collapsed into Aisha's arms, the warmth of the hug breaking the dam of her composure. And as Aisha guided her to the worn couch in the living room, where mismatched pillows and framed photos of family gatherings created a haven of genuine warmth, she whispered that they had kicked her out, Alexander and Victoria and Sophia replacing her like she had never been there, all because of her race, and Aisha pulled back to pour them both mugs of herbal tea, the steam rising like unspoken fury as she urged Latrice to start from the beginning and breathe, assuring her that she was safe here, in this space that felt like home. The betrayal poured out in halting words, for Latrice recounted the kitchen confrontation with its cold declarations and united front, Victoria's sneering laced with racial venom that echoed the years of subtle and overt judgments she'd endured. And as the tea warmed her chilled bones, the memories flooded back unbidden but insistent, pulling her into the past like a riptide that threatened to drown her anew. It had started subtly right after the honeymoon, for Alexander's family was old money with a fortune built on real estate empires that spanned generations. Empires rumored to have profited from redlining and displacing black communities in the 60s. And Latrice, with her Southside roots and community college degree, had been the outlier, the charming surprise Alexander claimed to love. But Victoria saw her as an intrusion, often making overt comments like preferring to keep things traditional in their social circles without affirmative action in marriage. Flashbacks flickered like old film reels as Latrice sipped her tea, recalling the first family dinner at the villa where Victoria critiqued her simple sundress as quaint but insisting on something more refined and less ethnic, which Alexander had chuckled off, while Latrice felt the sting and changed into a borrowed blouse that felt like a costume. Then came the galas with endless clinking glasses and forced small talk, where Victoria introduced her as Alexander's little wife from the other side of town. The diverse one, her tone laced with condescension, sometimes adding that they were so progressive for welcoming her. And Latrice smiled through it, standing silently at Alexander's side, with her voice softening to whispers, lest she embarrass him with her accent or opinions on racial injustice. Worse were the private barbs that cut deepest. For once after a miscarriage Latrice had kept hidden from most, Victoria cornered her in the powder room and said it was a shame she couldn't carry. Perhaps for the best, since their family needed strong heirs without mixed heritage. And Alexander knew but said nothing, his silence a deeper wound than any insult, growing distant as his affections cooled like autumn air. Late nights turned into absences that left Latrice alone in the vast house, cooking meals that went uneaten and typing up his reports until dawn, all while Victoria invited Sophia to casual lunches, the ghost haunting their marriage with her Ivy League polish and effortless charm that fit the gilded narrative. And Latrice whispered to Aisha that she had tried so hard, changing her wardrobe, learning their etiquette, even taking those damn wine-tasting classes. But it was never enough, for she was invisible, there but not seen, overlooked at every turn because of her skin. And Alexander had let it happen, choosing them over her. Aisha leaned forward with fierce eyes, saying that it was because Latrice had been trying to fit into a mold not made for her, reminding her that she was the girl who organized food drives in high school and dreamed of teaching kids like them. Not some trophy for their shelf, and this wasn't on her, but on them and their narrow racist world. Words that struck a chord and stirred the quiet fire Latrice had felt igniting as she left the villa. For years she'd shrunk herself, believing love meant sacrifice. But now in Aisha's cozy space surrounded by reminders of her roots, posters of black icons and shelves of well-thumbed books on civil rights, the truth crystallized, for she'd given everything only to be discarded, the humiliation burning, but so did a budding resolve that promised to forge her anew. As the night deepened, Aisha set up the guest room, a small space with a quilt her grandmother had sewn, and Latrice unpacked sparingly, with her mind racing through the whirlwind of the evening. But in the quiet, she rifled through her bag and pulled out a forgotten envelope from Alexander's old jacket pocket, something she'd grabbed in haste, the legal jargon jumping off the page with property transfers and signatures forged in Alexander's hand alone. Her heart pounded as she called softly to Aisha, holding the paper and saying to look at this for they had planned it all along. And Aisha's eyes widened as she scanned it, declaring that this wasn't right but straight up fraud, for he had forged it or snuck it through without her knowing, and they needed to get her a lawyer because this changed everything. Latrice nodded with the pieces falling into place, for the pain was raw, but for the first time she saw a path forward, not through tears but through truth. And as sleep finally claimed her, the distant sirens of the south side lulled her like a promise, for she was home, and from here she would rise. The quiet fire now a steady flame, ready to burn away the injustices that had bound her. Sleep evaded Latrice that night in Aisha's guest room, her mind a torrent of what-ifs and whys that replayed the kitchen betrayal like a haunting reel. But by morning the south side stirred with life, kids shouting on sidewalks and vendors setting up carts of fresh fruit and coffee, and Latrice rose with the sun, her reflection in the mirror showing dark circles under her brown eyes, yet also a spark of determination that ignited as she dressed simply in jeans and a blouse with her hair bunched low in its elegant knot. For no more hiding, today she would uncover the full extent of their deception and fight back against the racism that had poisoned her marriage. Aisha drove them downtown, navigating the bustling streets toward a modest law office squeezed between high-rises, saying she had looked the place up last night because they specialized in family law, helping folks like them who got screwed by the system, especially with racial biases. And as they parked with a jolt, Latrice's fingers drummed the dashboard, with her thoughts racing back to the villa's opulent kitchen, now likely echoing with Sophia's laughter. But she pushed the image away, focusing on the envelope clutched in her bag like a weapon forged from their betrayal. The office was unassuming with faded carpets and stacks of files on metal shelves, under the faint hum of fluorescent lights, and a receptionist with kind eyes ushered them into a small conference room where they waited amid the scent of stale coffee in desperation. For Latrice felt the air thick with the weight of stories like hers, women overlooked and discarded. And as the door opened, a middle-aged lawyer named Kwame Diallo entered, his suit rumpled but his gaze sharp, black like them with salt and pepper hair, and a voice carrying the weight of countless battles, introducing himself and urging her to tell him what was going on, which she did with her voice gaining strength as she laid out the betrayal. The united front of Alexander, Victoria, and Sophia, the overt racism, and now this damning letter. Aisha handed over the document with her protective stance like a shield, and Kwame read it carefully, his brow furrowing deeper with each line as he confirmed it was marital property jointly owned, for they had bought the villa together after marriage with her putting in savings from teaching gigs. But there was no signature from her, and the date was before he kicked her out, which screamed fraud since in Illinois, marital assets couldn't just be transferred without both parties' consent. And if he forged her name or bypassed her entirely, that was illegal. Layering on potential conspiracy by involving his mother, but they would need more like bank statements, deeds, and any other records she had, especially given the racial elements she described, which might tie into discrimination, claims for added leverage. Latrice's heart pounded with a mix of vindication and dread, for the betrayal felt tangible now, not just emotional wreckage, but a crime she could fight, particularly with the racism, making it a broader injustice that Kwame noted could strengthen their case under grounds of cruelty and fraud intertwined with emotional abuse. And as they talked, flashbacks assaulted her with Alexander's casual dismissals when she'd asked about finances, saying not to worry because he had it handled. Victoria's pointed comments at family events like the charity gala, where she'd introduced Sophia as the one who got away right in front of her, while adding that she was from good stock with no surprises, and Sophia's knowing smiles as if she'd been waiting in the wings, all weaving a web spun from privilege and prejudice targeting her because she didn't fit their gilded white narrative. Leaving the office, Latrice felt a shift with a quiet power blooming amid the shame as the city buzzed around them, and skyscrapers pierced the sky like accusations, admitting to Aisha that it felt good, like she was not just reacting anymore, but acting. And Aisha grinned fiercely and proudly, saying, "Damn right." But this was just the start, mentioning that Kwame had suggested interning or assisting at the firm to learn the ropes, which could be a way to stay involved without breaking the bank. Latrice paused with the idea igniting something within her, saying she thought she'd do it because no more being invisible, and it was time to learn how to fight their way quietly but lethally. For as they drove back, the envelope in her bag felt less like a curse and more like a weapon with the deception uncovered. But the real battle just beginning, and that afternoon she returned to the office to accept the part-time role as an assistant filing documents, answering phones and shadowing cases. Not out of pity, but because Kwame saw the fighter emerging in her eyes, declaring that knowledge was her weapon to dismantle theirs. The office was a labyrinth of cluttered desks and overflowing bookshelves, with the air thick with printer ink and determination. And her first task was mundane sorting mail in the reception area. But as she worked, her mind raced, piecing together the fragments of her shattered life. For the fraud wasn't just a document, but a blueprint of their cruelty. And she was done being the footnote in their story, especially as Kwame introduced her to Maria Gonzalez, whose calm demeanor masked a razor-sharp intellect and who dove straight into the basics of marital property in Illinois as equitable distribution fair, but not always equal. With fraud like this tipping the scales, particularly with discriminatory motives that could petition for temporary support while building the case. Latrice absorbed it all with her notebook filling with frantic scribbles of hidden assets, spousal maintenance, and discovery motions. And Maria's explanations were patient yet pointed, weaving in real-world examples that mirrored her pain, like women who lost everything to cheating executives but uncovered offshore accounts funding racist organizations, which reminded Latrice of the day they bought the villa with Alexander's arm around her waist as they signed the deed together, whispering it was their forever home. Now a fortress barring her entry with Sophia, likely redecorating under Victoria's approval. The thought fueled her as she asked probing questions, with her voice growing firmer about assets they might hide like family trusts or charities. And Maria nodded approvingly, saying that was smart and where a PI came in, picking up her phone to dial Liam, who arrived within the hour. A weathered 48-year-old with a rumpled trench coat and eyes that missed nothing, shaking Latrice's hand with a firm grip and a gravelly but kind voice, as Maria said he had a case for him with Latrice, who had fire. Over coffee in the break room, Latrice laid out the details of the forged transfer, Alexander's finance career, Victoria's charity foundations that seemed more like slush funds, and the overt racism underpinning it all. And Liam listened intently, jotting notes on a battered notepad, saying they'd start with public records like deeds and tax filings, then dig deeper into bank trails and emails if they could subpoena. For families like the Carvers, buried skeletons deep, but he always found the shovel, and by evening he had preliminary reports on his laptop pointing to financial ledgers where Victoria's Foundation Carver Cares showed large transfers from Alexander's accounts not as donations but laundering, with some funds routed to organizations promoting racial discrimination disguised as community preservation, and the villa transferred to a family trust 2 weeks ago, right before the Booten classic asset hiding with a side of bigotry. Latrice's pulse quickened as the deception unfolded like a dark tapestry, flashbacks surging again with Victoria at a gala, boasting about her philanthropy, while sidelining her saying their work helped the right kind of people. Alexander's late nights claiming board meetings, and Sophia's reappearance timed too perfectly. But now a new twist emerged in Liam's findings. An hidden email chain suggesting Sophia wasn't just a mistress, but involved in a scheme to frame Latrice for infidelity, planting false evidence to justify the divorce. And Latrice murmured that they thought she'd disappear quietly, but she wasn't going anywhere, with Maria placing a hand on her shoulder, saying this was the quiet fight gathering ammo without fanfare, by filing for support first to freeze assets, then hitting them where it hurt. Latrice spent the next days immersed shadowing Maria on client meetings and learning to spot red flags in contracts, each lesson chipping away at her invisibility and replacing it with armor. For Aisha called nightly with her voice a lifeline, saying she was building an empire of her own. And the work was grueling, with long hours poring over legalese, but empowering as Latrice documented everything from dates of insults to ignored pleas, even the miscarriages Victoria had dismissed as failures of her lineage, no detail too small as each was a brick in her wall of evidence. Liam's updates came in whispers, with more hidden accounts and whispers of Alexander's embezzlement to fund Victoria's lifestyle. And they're planning something big, he confided one afternoon. An engagement bash for him and Sophia overheard at a club. But there's more, with Sophia's pregnant, yet early tests suggesting the father might not be Alexander. Perfect timing to expose, but needing ironclad proof. And Latrice's heart twisted, but she channeled it into resolve. As the week ended, she stood taller with her simple outfits now carrying an air of quiet authority, for the fight was far from over. But she was no longer the overlooked wife. She was the storm brewing in silence, ready to strike. The downtown law office hummed with the quiet intensity of battles fought on paper and precedent, a far cry from the glittering facades of Alexander's world where Latrice had once shrunk herself to fit. But now she stepped through the door the next morning with her resolve hardened like steel, forged in the fire of betrayal. The envelope from the villa tucked safely in her bag as a talisman against the doubt that still whispered in her ear. For Kwame Diallo had offered her a part-time role as an assistant filing documents, answering phones and shadowing cases not out of pity, but because he saw the fighter emerging in her eyes, declaring that knowledge was her weapon to learn the system and dismantle theirs. Isha had dropped her off with a fierce hug and a promise to check in later, leaving Latrice to navigate this new terrain alone, in a labyrinth of cluttered desks and overflowing bookshelves, where the air was thick with the scent of printer ink and determination. And her first task was mundane sorting mail in the reception area. But as she worked, her mind raced, piecing together the fragments of her shattered life. For the fraud wasn't just a document, but a blueprint of their cruelty, and she was done being the footnote in their story, especially as by midday Kwame introduced her to Maria Gonzalez, a 38-year-old lawyer whose calm demeanor masked a razor-sharp intellect, petite with a neat bob of dark hair framing her thoughtful face, and glasses perched on the bridge of her nose like a badge of wisdom. Having been with the firm for years, specializing in family law cases where women like Latrice, overlooked, undervalued, and often racially marginalized, fought back against the odds. And Maria said Kwame had told her she was here to learn which was good, because the law wasn't kind to the unprepared. So let's get started as they retreated to her cramped office lined with case files and motivational quotes from civil rights icons like Martin Luther King Jr. and Angela Davis. Maria pulled up a chair beside her desk and dove straight into the basics with marital property in Illinois, being equitable, distribution fair, but not always equal. Yet fraud like this, especially with discriminatory motives, tipped the scales, since her husband's transfer, without consent, was marital misconduct that could petition for temporary support while building the case, and perhaps add a civil rights angle if the racism was provable. And Latrice absorbed it all, with her notebook filling with frantic scribbles of hidden assets, spousal maintenance, and discovery motions. For Maria's explanations were patient but pointed, weaving in real-world examples that mirrored her pain like women who walked in broken and left unbreakable, reminding her of one who lost everything to a cheating executive, but uncovered his offshore accounts funding racist organizations on the side. And as the afternoon wore on, flashbacks intruded like unwelcome guests, with Latrice remembering the day they bought the villa, when Alexander's arm was around her waist as they signed the deed together, whispering it was their forever home. Now a fortress, barring her entry, with Sophia, likely redecorating under Victoria's approval. But the thought fueled her as she asked probing questions, with her voice growing firmer, about assets they might hide like family trusts or charities. And Maria nodded approvingly, saying that was smart, and that's where a PI came in, picking up her phone to dial a number from memory and telling Liam she had a case for him to meet Latrice Monroe, who had fire. Liam arrived within the hour, a weathered 48-year-old with a rumpled trench coat and eyes that missed nothing, his salt and pepper hair tousled and his build solid from years of stakeouts and sifting through shadows, shaking Latrice's hand with a firm grip and a gravelly but kind voice. As Maria said, he was up against old money with a racist streak, and he'd toppled a few of those trees. So tell him what they were hunting. And over coffee in the break room, Latrice laid out the details of the forged transfer, Alexander's finance career, Victoria's charity foundations that seemed more like slush funds, and the overt racism that underpinned it all, with Liam listening intently, jotting notes on a battered notepad, saying they'd start with public records, deeds, and tax filings, then dig deeper into bank trails and emails if they could subpoena, for families like the Carvers, buried skeletons deep, but he always found the shovel. By evening, Liam had already pulled preliminary reports on his laptop pointing to a screen of financial ledgers, where Victoria's foundation, Carver Cares, showed large transfers from Alexander's accounts not as donations, but laundering, with some funds routed to organizations promoting racial discrimination, like those lobbying against black communities disguised as community preservation, and the villa transferred to a family trust 2 weeks ago, right before the Booten classic asset hiding with a side of bigotry, which quickened Latrice's pulse as the deception unfolded like a dark tapestry, with flashbacks surging again of Victoria at a gala boasting about her philanthropy, while sidelining her saying their work helped the right kind of people and calling Latrice a strange experiment in diversity, Alexander's late nights claiming board meetings, and Sophia's reappearance timed too perfectly. But now a new twist emerged in Liam's findings. An hidden email chain suggesting Sophia wasn't just a mistress, but involved in a scheme to frame Latrice for infidelity, planting false evidence to justify the divorce. And Latrice murmured that they thought she'd disappear quietly, but she wasn't going anywhere, with Maria placing a hand on her shoulder saying this was the quiet fight gathering ammo, without fanfare, by filing for support first to freeze assets, then hitting them where it hurt. Latrice spent the next days immersed shadowing Maria on client meetings and learning to spot red flags in contracts, each lesson chipping away at her invisibility and replacing it with armor. For Aisha called nightly, with her voice a lifeline, saying she was building an empire of her own. And the work was grueling, with long hours poring over legalese but empowering, as Latrice documented everything from dates of insults to ignored pleas, even the miscarriages Victoria had dismissed as failures of her lineage. No detail too small, as each was a brick in her wall of evidence. And Liam's updates came in whispers, with more hidden accounts and whispers of Alexander's embezzlement to fund Victoria's lifestyle. Confiding one afternoon that they were planning something big, like an engagement bash for him and Sophia overheard at a club. But there was more, with Sophia's pregnant, yet early tests suggesting the father might not be Alexander. Perfect timing to expose, but needing ironclad proof. Latrice's heart twisted, but she channeled it into resolve as the week ended, with her standing taller and her simple outfits now carrying an air of quiet authority. For the fight was far from over. But she was no longer the overlooked wife. She was the storm brewing in silence, ready to strike, and the discoveries fueled her forward, linking the past humiliations to the present battle, where every piece of evidence strengthened her case against the racism that had defined her marriage. The whisper of impending chaos echoed in Latrice's ears as she stared at the invitation Liam had procured. A gilded card announcing the Carver family's grand celebration of new beginnings, with Alexander and Sophia's engagement party set for that very evening at the opulent ballroom of the Drake Hotel overlooking Lake Michigan's shimmering expanse. And Liam had slipped it to her during their last meeting, with his gravelly voice low, saying this was her moment, with ironclad proof in hand, to walk in, drop the bomb, and walk out without theatrics but just truth. While Maria had nodded in agreement, with her eyes gleaming with strategic fire, adding to file the motions tomorrow, but tonight show them she wasn't erased. Latrice spent the afternoon in quiet preparation as the law office's hum faded into the background, while she gathered the folder thick with documents, including bank statements, Liam's investigative reports, and a bombshell DNA test he had discreetly obtained through contacts confirming the child's father was actually Victor Langston, Victoria's longtime secret business partner with his own racist scandals. Not Alexander, which added layers of irony and hypocrisy to their perfect facade that had mocked her black heritage. Her heart raced, but her hands were steady as no more shadows, for this was her light, and she chose her outfit with care. A simple white dress that hugged her caramel skin, elegant yet unassuming, with her straight black hair bunched low in its signature knot, and no jewelry save her mother's necklace, a subtle talisman of strength, while Aisha texted encouragement, saying to go get them and make them regret. But as Latrice hailed a cab with the city lights blurring into streaks of resolve, flashbacks intruded like unwelcome guests, reminding her of similar parties, where she'd stood silently beside Alexander, enduring Victoria's barbs, like smiling brighter because she looked so urban, and Sophia's re-entry into their lives, always at Victoria's invitation, with her laughter a dagger that now rested on a subtle bump under her cocktail dress. The pregnancy Victoria had hinted at in whispers, boasting it would secure the family's pure lineage. Latrice lingered at the edges of the ballroom spectacle, with crystal flutes clinking and floral arches framing a stage where a string quartet played softly, tables groaning under silver platters of caviar and champagne towers, with golden name cards glittering under candlelight. And at the center, Alexander and Sophia held court with his arm around her waist and her golden hair cascading like a crown, while Victoria orbited them with her silver waves impeccable, and her smile a mask of triumph as she air-kissed guests from Chicago's elite politicians and financiers, all drawn to the Carver name. Her pulse thundered as flashbacks assaulted her with endless evenings of clinking glasses and forced small talk, where Victoria introduced her as Alexander's little wife from the other side of town, the diverse one, her tone laced with condescension, sometimes adding they were so progressive for welcoming her. And Latrice smiled through it, standing silently at Alexander's side, with her voice softening to whispers, lest she embarrass him with her opinions on racial injustice. But worse were the private barbs that cut deepest like after her miscarriage, when Victoria cornered her in the powder room, saying it was a shame she couldn't carry perhaps for the best, since their family needed strong heirs without mixed heritage. And Alexander knew but said nothing, with his silence a deeper wound than any insult growing distant as his affections cooled. Late nights turned into absences, leaving Latrice alone in the vast house, cooking meals that went uneaten and typing reports until dawn, all while Victoria invited Sophia to casual lunches, the ghost haunting their marriage with her Ivy League polish and effortless charm that fit the gilded narrative. And now the quartet paused with Victoria, ascending the stage microphone in hand, her voice amplified like a decree beginning with "Dear friends and family, tonight we celebrate love renewed as Alexander and Sophia. Our perfect pair embark on a future bright with promise after trials, finding our way back to what was always meant to be. To new beginnings, free from undesirable influences." Applause rippling glasses raised Alexander, beaming, pulling Sophia closer, her blue eyes sparkling with victory. Latrice moved then, with her steps deliberate, weaving through the crowd like a shadow turning solid as whispers followed, asking who she was. But she ignored them, ascending the stage's side with the folder clutched like a sword, and Victoria's speech faltered as Latrice approached the podium, placing the documents on the table beside the cake, a towering confection of white fondant and gold leaf. While the room hushed with confusion, etching faces, and Alexander's smile froze, his blue eyes widening in horror. Sophia paling, her hand instinctively covering her stomach, Victoria's red lips parting in shock, hissing what was the meaning of this, and that she wasn't welcome here, for people like her never were. Latrice met her gaze with her voice clear and unwavering, projecting across the ballroom, without need for the mic, saying she wouldn't take long. And to those who didn't know her, she was Latrice Monroe, Alexander's wife, still legally despite their efforts to erase her because of her race, gasps echoing, phones emerging from pockets. Alexander stepping forward, his face reddening, ordering her to leave now because this wasn't the place. But she held up a hand unflinching, declaring this was exactly the place for they'd celebrated, while stripping her bare, all while spewing racist venom. But secrets didn't stay buried, and she opened the folder, pulling out the first sheaf, explaining this was the deed to their villa transferred to Victoria's name, without her consent 2 weeks before they threw her out, fraud plain and simple, with murmurs swelling, guests shifting uncomfortably. Next, bank statements showing transfers from Alexander's accounts to Victoria's charity, not donations but embezzlement, hundreds of thousands siphoned to fund their lifestyles, hidden from taxes and her, with Victoria's face draining of color, clutching the podium, crying lies and calling for security. But Latrice pressed on, her brown eyes locking onto Sophia, revealing a medical report from their private clinic where the child she was carrying, DNA confirmed, wasn't Alexander's, but Victor Langston's, the room erupting in stunned silence. Then chaos, whispers turning to exclamations, cameras flashing, Sophia staggering back, tears welling, her triumphant facade crumbling, asking how she knew. Alexander lunged, grabbing Latrice's arm, his voice a desperate growl, accusing her of ruining everything. But she wrenched free, her stance unyielding, declaring, no, they did by taking her home. Her trust, her voice, all because she didn't fit their white ideal, and now she was taking it back. while Victoria turned on Sophia in fury, her ringed hand flying in a slap that echoed like a gunshot, promising it was his and their lineage, with guests fleeing in scandalized waves. Latrice gathered her papers, handing copies to a waiting associate from the firm Maria's backup plan, announcing legal proceedings started tomorrow, and they'd hear from the courts, perhaps the FBI, for the embezzlement and hate funding, turning to descend the stage with graceful poise as the ballroom dissolved into pandemonium behind her, with Alexander shouting denials, Victoria collapsing into a chair, Sophia sobbing reporters, swarming phones ringing with leaked tips. But Latrice didn't look back, the night air greeting her like freedom as she stepped into the street hailing a cab. The quiet fight had erupted into thunder, and the tables were turning, but in a twist she hadn't anticipated, an anonymous tip to Liam revealed an even deeper secret. Victoria's family fortune originated from slave-owning and Star, a history they'd buried to maintain their pure image, which would be the final nail. The gilded invitation clutched in Latrice's hand announced the Carver family's celebration of Alexander and Sophia's engagement at the Drake Hotel's opulent ballroom overlooking Lake Michigan. And Liam had urged her with his gravelly voice low, saying this was her moment with ironclad proof to walk in, drop the bomb, and walk out with just truth. While Maria nodded, her eyes gleaming, adding to file motions tomorrow, but tonight, show them she wasn't erased. Latrice prepared quietly as the law office's hum faded, gathering a folder with bank statements, Liam's reports, and a DNA test confirming Sophia's child belonged to Victor Langston, not Alexander, adding hypocrisy to their racist facade. And she chose a simple white dress, hugging her caramel skin, with her glossy black hair bunched low, and her mother's necklace a talisman, while Aisha texted encouragement, saying to make them regret. But as Latrice hailed a cab with city lights blurring flashbacks, hit of parties where she'd stood silently beside Alexander, enduring Victoria's barbs like smiling brighter, because she looked urban in Sophia's smug laughter. The Drake loomed like a gilded cage with chandeliers spilling light on guests, as Latrice slipped in unnoticed, her forged invitation letting her blend like a ghost reclaiming form, with her pulse thundering, yet her steps deliberate. The ballroom sparkled with crystal flutes clinking and tables groaning under caviar and champagne towers. Alexander and Sophia holding court with his arm around her waist, her golden hair cascading, while Victoria orbited with her silver waves, impeccable air-kissing Chicago's elite. And flashbacks surged of Victoria's gala introductions, calling Latrice the diverse wife from the other side of town, her tone condescending. But now the quartet paused as Victoria ascended the stage, microphone in hand, decreeing tonight they celebrated love, renewed with Alexander and Sophia, their perfect pair free from undesirable influences. Applause rippling Alexander, beaming, Sophia's eyes sparkling. Latrice weaved through the crowd like a shadow turning solid, ignoring whispers of who she was ascending the stage's side, with her folder clutched like a sword. And Victoria's speech faltered as she placed documents beside the fondant cake. The room hushing with confusion, Alexander's smile freezing Sophia, paling her hand on her belly. Victoria hissing what was the meaning of this, and she wasn't welcome for people like her. Never were, but Latrice's voice rang clear, saying she was Latrice Monroe, Alexander's wife, still legally despite their racist erasure. Gasps echoed, phones emerging, Alexander ordering her to leave. This wasn't the place, but Latrice declared it was exactly the place, for they'd stripped her bare with racist venom, and secrets didn't stay buried, revealing the villa deed transferred without consent fraud, plain and simple, with murmurs swelling. Then bank statements showing embezzlement through Victoria's charity, hundreds of thousands siphoned with Victoria, crying lies calling security. But Latrice locked eyes on Sophia, revealing the DNA test, proving her child wasn't Alexander's, but Victor Langston's, the room erupting in chaos, cameras flashing, Sophia staggering, tears welling, asking how she knew. And Alexander lunged, accusing her of ruin, but Latrice wrenched free, saying they took her home trust voice because she wasn't their white ideal. Now she took it back. Victoria slapped Sophia, the sound like a gunshot, screaming, it was his guests fleeing in scandal. And Latrice handed copies to Maria's associate, announcing legal proceedings tomorrow, maybe FBI for embezzlement and hate funding, descending the stage with poise as pandemonium erupted, Alexander shouting, Victoria collapsing, Sophia sobbing. But Latrice stepped into the night air like freedom hailing a cab with a tip to Liam revealing the Carver's slave-owning past the final nail. The cab carried Latrice from the Drake's chaos, with her folder clutched like a shield. Adrenaline coursing, mingling with vindication, as the ballroom's pandemonium replayed with Victoria's slap, Sophia's tears, and Alexander's futile rage. Guests scattering phones ablaze with recordings set to flood social media. And by morning, headlines screamed of the Carver scandal, fraud, embezzlement, paternity twists, and racist ties exposed at an elite bash with hashtags Carver collapse. Shock justice for Latrice trending as old acquaintances leaked tales of black employees fired under false pretenses and donations to anti-immigration groups. While Latrice paced Aisha's guest room, her white dress draped like a shed skin, feeling the weight lift as her betrayal became a public reckoning. Maria called saying the exposure lit a fire under authorities with the state's attorney, probing embezzlement and discrimination funding, federal agents eyeing hate crimes, and they filed her divorce petition with a restraining order on assets so they couldn't touch a dime. While the slave-owning history sparked protests with chants of reparations now, and Sophia fled to the Hamptons ring off paternity tests, public Alexander's calls desperate, then silenced by subpoenas. Victoria's social reign crumbling with invitations, rescinded board seats, vacated her foundation, facing audits, donors pulling out. Liam unearthed more rot with offshore accounts and Alexander's falsified loans, using the villa alongside emails of Victoria's smear campaign against Latrice hiring hackers to plant false affair evidence only for them to turn whistleblower upon learning racial motives, and he reported over coffee at the office, his trench coat slung over a chair, that they were lawyering up. But her case was airtight with public outrage over racism, making it a civil rights symbol. While flashbacks haunted Latrice of Alexander's tender college proposals, before Victoria's racist ideology, and Sophia's sly glances always a step ahead. But now the tables turned with Victoria's no comments to reporters' futile, and Alexander on leave his political dreams in smoke. Federal raids hit their offices, carting files amid flashing cameras, which Latrice watched from afar with closure settling. And as protests grew outside Carver offices, demanding accountability, she felt her quiet fire ignite a larger blaze, sparking citywide talks on equity, turning her pain into a beacon for change. The courtroom loomed as a sterile chamber in the Daily Center, where justice felt distant yet intimate with Latrice poised in Maria's Lent suit, her hair-bunched eyes fixed on the judge. While the scandal's aftermath pressed like an invisible force, hashtags turning her fight into a symbol against racism. Reporters swarming outside with protesters chanting, reparations echoing the slave-owning history Liam unearthed. And Alexander entered, haggard, hair-disheveled eyes hollow-trailed by Victoria. Her silver waves dulled fury beneath composure, as Maria presented evidence with precision, forging deeds, embezzling over 500,000 emails, plotting Latrice's ousting, and ties to racist organizations, the courtroom murmuring Alexander's lawyer, stammering defenses of discord. But the judge's gavel declared fraud, misconduct, discriminatory intent, awarding Latrice half the assets, villa equity, spousal support, with restraining orders and federal referrals for hate crimes. Alexander slumping Victoria, storming out facing reporters with no comment, her social circle a prison of gossip. Federal agents raided their offices, carting files amid cameras, which Latrice watched with closure settling. For Victoria's fall completed with tabloids reporting asset sales for legal fees, her life reduced to seclusion with a prison sentence for embezzlement conspiracy, while Alexander faced charges, his career ruined, forced into court-mandated therapy. And Latrice left with Maria and Liam flanking her, Aisha, waiting outside, hugging her, saying she turned tables to splinters, the victory bittersweet with scars lingering, but self-respect blooming, no longer invisible, but the force exposing their rot against systemic racism. Latrice envisioned a future unbound with settlement funds seeding her rebirth. Not Carver riches, but enough for half the villa's equity and support. And with Maria's guidance, she leased a Southside office, a sunlit room with exposed brick overlooking murals of Black resilience, naming it Echoes of Strength, a place for women silenced by racism to find strength with desks and a cozy consultation corner. Aisha hanging a Maya Angelou quote, saying you may encounter defeats but not be defeated, declaring this her empire. Clients trickled in like a mother from Englewood, clutching custody papers, Latrice connecting her to Maria Liam, and activists, her scars resonating as she shared how to document everything. And as word spread, the office buzzed with a Latina entrepreneur and Black widow fighting biases. Latrice, guiding with legal savvy and empathy from her trials workshops, teaching advocacy and recognizing microaggressions, saying their voice mattered, fighting racism communally, flashbacks of Victoria's slurs and Alexander's dismissal fueling her, not crippling, and her bond with Kwame grew into a tentative romance built on respect and pride, turning pain into purpose. The skyline of Chicago stretched before Latrice like a canvas rewritten with its towers, no longer symbols of exclusion, but beacons of possibility as weeks after the courthouse victory, the settlement funds arrived. Not a fortune by Carver standards, but enough to seed her rebirth with half the villa's equity and spousal support trickling in monthly, alongside the quiet satisfaction of watching Alexander's world unravel from afar, where federal indictments loomed over him and Victoria, their names synonymous with scandal in the city's whispers, while Sophia had vanished into obscurity, her pregnancy a footnote in tabloid lore, but not before publicly apologizing in a tearful interview, admitting the pressure from Victoria's racist ideals had warped her. Latrice didn't gloat, but built with Maria's guidance and Liam's occasional check-ins, leasing a modest office space in a revitalized Southside building, a sunlit room with exposed brick walls and large windows overlooking community murals depicting Black history and resilience. And she named it Echoes of Strength, the sign going up on a crisp autumn morning, echoing her journey as a place for women silenced in marriages, divorces, and betrayals, especially those facing racial discrimination, to find their strength again with no frills. Just desks, filing cabinets, and a cozy consultation corner with plush chairs and herbal tea on offer, alongside resources on civil rights and community support. Latrice stood back as Aisha hung the final poster, a quote from Maya Angelou saying, "You may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated." Her dreadlocks swaying as she pulled Latrice into a hug, declaring, this was it, her empire. And the first clients trickled in, slowly drawn, by word of mouth and a small ad in local papers, like a young mother from Englewood with eyes hollow from years of emotional abuse and racial slurs from her in-laws, clutching custody papers like lifelines. Latrice listening with her own scars resonating in the woman's story of gaslighting, financial control, and invisibility, compounded by racism, sharing softly that she had been there too with a taking everything because of her skin. But she took it back, and here's how to start. By documenting everything, just like she did, connecting her to Maria for pro bono filings, Liam for discreet investigations, and local activists for emotional support, which left the woman with hope flickering in her eyes, a referral card in hand. As word spread, the office buzzed with life from a Latina entrepreneur, from Pilsen swindled in a business marriage hybrid with discriminatory undertones, to a Black widow from Hyde Park fighting for her late husband's hidden assets while battling a state lawyer's biases. And Latrice became their guide, blending legal savvy with empathy, honed from her trials with mornings beginning with case reviews over coffee and afternoons with workshops on financial literacy, self-advocacy, and recognizing racial microaggressions, telling them that they weren't alone with their voice mattering second, third, or 100th chance, and remembering that fighting racism wasn't just personal, but communal, which empowered them to reclaim their narratives just as she had. Flashbacks wove through her days like threads in a tapestry from the villa's empty halls, where her footsteps echoed in solitude, to Victoria's cutting words at Gallus, reducing her to a shadow with slurs like exotic experiment, Alexander's cold dismissal in the kitchen, and Sophia's smug intrusion. But those memories no longer crippled. They fueled her forward as one evening sorting files, she paused at a photo from her wedding day, tucked away in a drawer, tracing Alexander's face with a pang of what if lingering, but setting it aside, murmuring that was then, for now she was whole. And in a gentle twist of fate, she found herself growing closer to Kwame, whose shared passion for justice blossomed into a tentative romance built on mutual respect and cultural pride. that felt like a healing balm after the toxicity of her past marriage. Aisha became her unofficial partner, handling outreach in the community, with flyers at churches' talks, at shelters, and partnerships with Black Lives Matter chapters, saying one night over soul food at a local diner with plates of fried chicken and collards steaming between them, that she was changing lives, remembering when she showed up on her doorstep broken. But look at her now, queen of her castle, lifting others up. And Latrice smiled, her straight black hair catching the light in its low bun, saying it wasn't about her anymore. With these women reminding her why she fought and exposing the Carver's history, sparking a citywide conversation on reparations and equity that turned her personal victory into a communal one. Success wasn't measured in dollars, but in the thank you notes pinned to her wall, in hugs from clients who'd won their cases like a teacher who regained her home after uncovering her husband's fraud, writing that Latrice had given her voice back and showed her how to fight racism head-on, which she framed beside her desk. Yet challenges arose, of course, with the emotional toll of reliving traumas and occasional backlash from powerful exes echoing the Carvers. Like Alexander trying a smear campaign online, with anonymous posts painting her as vindictive. But Liam quashed it with countersuits and public sympathy, fueled by the racial justice angle, swung her way, ensuring her mission endured. Victoria's fall from grace was complete, with tabloids reporting her selling assets to cover legal fees. Her glamorous life reduced to seclusion, culminating in prison for embezzlement and conspiracy. While Alexander faced charges, his career ruined, forced to confront complicity in therapy, and as winter blanketed the city in snow, Latrice sat in her office after hours, the space quiet, save for the hum of the heater, opening a journal to pen reflections that she had lost a husband, a home, but gained herself in a community with the pain, sculpting her turning fragility into fortitude and personal betrayal, into a beacon of empowerment rippling outward to heal others, as she'd healed herself, fostering a world where justice prevailed, racism was challenged, and every voice was heard. One crisp evening, a new client arrived, a young woman with wide eyes and a story mirroring Latrice's own, of betrayal replacement and fighting for scraps amid racial prejudice. And as they talked, Latrice saw her younger self in the tears and clenched fists promising they'd turn the tables, handing over resources, and walking the woman out, glancing at the skyline, with lights twinkling like stars aligned. For this was her new beginning, not an end, but a continuum of empowerment rippling outward to heal others as she'd healed herself, fostering a world where justice prevailed. Racism was challenged and every voice was heard. And there you have it, the story of Latrice Monroe, a Black woman who rose from the ashes of betrayal and racism to build a legacy of empowerment and justice. What did you think? Did Latrice's journey resonate with you or remind you of someone in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how this tale inspired you or sparked a conversation on racial justice. Thank you so much for joining us on this emotional ride. Your support means the world. Hit that like button, subscribe for more empowering stories, and turn on notifications so we can meet again soon. Until next time, stay strong and keep fighting for what's right.